Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about our sponsor, thegreatcoursesplus.com. The Great Courses is, of course, the teaching company's Great Courses, of which I've been a longtime fan and user. And now they have an app. You just download the free app on your phone, you tap on it, and you go to whatever course you're interested in listening to. This is my latest one. I've been going through Native Peoples of North America. This is lecture number 17 I'm up to now by Daniel Cobb, PhD. The beautiful thing about the Great Courses Plus app is that you can skip around with lectures. You don't have to just kind of grind through lecture after lecture for an entire course if you decide you don't want to listen to the whole thing. This particular course is 24 lectures, and so like most courses, I probably won't listen to every single lecture. But this one I've been thinking about because of the whole national conversation on reparations for African Americans. And if we go that route, then Native Americans certainly have a case to be made. And this history is really disturbing. It's difficult to listen to because it's reality of what happened here in North America. So I think it's the kind of thing where knowledge is good before we make political decisions. But anyway, that's not the point of this. I just want to encourage you to log on to thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon, and then you get a free trial as a listener to my podcast. Thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon, and you get a free trial. It's great. So give it a shot, give it a try. When you're driving, working out, doing chores, walking, hiking, whatever, it's a great way to consume content. All right. Thanks for listening. My guest today is Shelby Steele. The great Shelby Steele, often characterized as a black conservative, although he just calls himself a conservative. But that's kind of the focus of his work, why we constantly assess everybody by race. His latest book is called Shame: How America's Past Sins Have Polarized Our Country, and he's promoting a new film that he produced with his son Eli Steele called What Killed Michael Brown. It's a very moving film. It's out this week that we're releasing this podcast, and they actually go to Ferguson and talk to the people involved and many community leaders and so forth to talk about race in America. And of course, since that happened, there's the George Floyd case and Derek Chauvin. So we talk about that. We also discuss the 30th anniversary of his prize-winning book, The Content of Our Character, subtitled A New Vision of Race in America. And this book I used as a text for a course I taught on the history of great ideas. Here are my notes from the book, 4 pages of notes. It's really quite a great work of literature and a deep dive into race. 30 years ago, I thought, well, this should settle it. We will stop talking about race, and here we are. The latest issue of Skeptic is on race. We just can't seem to get away from it. So Shelby and I talk about the difference between race and populations, why race is such an important concept in America because of our history. The shame of his book title of the original sins of America, that is, say, the 1619 Project and identification of slavery and Jim Crow and all the racial discriminations that went on. But that's not the shame of his. That's the first shame. The second shame is the white guilt shame. And so I have him walk us through his theory that, in fact, that kind of white guilt leads to a lack of self-reliance and autonomy and self-esteem in blacks. And so we get into the black family, the idea of what fatherless homes lead to for black children. I kind of push him on what's the causal vector, what happens down the line if you have a fatherless home. And of course, we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, reparations, and kind of all the hot button issues today. And so if we don't get canceled, then hopefully you'll get to hear this. Well, you will, of course. So with that, I give you Shelby Steele. I should note, it's the 30th anniversary of your great book, The Content of Our Character. This was my copy from 1990.
Oh, wow.
I assigned this book for a course I taught on the history of great ideas at Glendale College, a community college. And I had mostly adult students. And to me, this is the idea behind that thought, the content of our character instead of the color of our skin, of course, coming from Dr. King's famous speech, is one of the great ideas of all time. And so I thought,
I would agree.
and so thankfully, that was 30 years ago. Thankfully, we're no longer having to talk about race in America. We've moved past that.
Are you trying to get it right, or
You got it all right, and you've
no? Yes, that's. I think we'll be talking for another 30 years,
yeah.
probably.
So, give us some thoughts of this. The subtitle of your book is "A New Vision of Race in America." Just kind of give us an overview of where you think we've come in the last 30 years since you wrote this book. And I'm going to read a couple passages after you give us a general overview.
Well, I think race is still a tangle in American life between the right and the left, blacks and whites, and so forth. And King's statement was marvelous. Content of our character rather than the color of our skin. In other words, something that is arbitrary, like the color of our skin, should not be relevant, where something that has to do with our character and shaping of it and the effort we make to establish it and so forth. This is what we need to be judging each other on the basis of. How have we gotten closer to that? In many ways, I absolutely can verify that we have. I grew up in segregated America. I know intimately what that was like, what it was all about. We are a million miles from there now. Opportunity is open everywhere for minorities. Has been for a long time now, and so I think that has changed. Intellectually, in our institutional life in America, universities, corporations, they have rediscovered race, the color of our skin, and use it in all sorts of ways that drive me crazy. Use it to achieve abstractions like diversity and inclusion, as though when you include somebody because of the color of their skin, that's a good thing, but you're not including them because of their character. So we haven't yet, it seems to me, learned the lesson that many Americans have in private life really learned, is that our race is just what is race? It's an inherently meaningless thing.
Yeah.
And it never means anything. It has no potential. In other words, race is, you don't work to establish or prove a race. There's nothing there, and so therefore, anytime anybody picks it up and uses it, it's always a corruption.
Yeah.
And we haven't yet. America hasn't yet absorbed that. So that now you see again corporations with diversity and programs and so forth, and thinking that if they can teach sensitivity and so forth and to race, that somehow that's a good thing. It's a terrible thing because it again keeps alive the source of this evil of race and racism that plague us, and it plagued us for centuries. It's never been to the good, it's always been to the bad. So even when it's picked up, oh, I'm going to achieve diversity, it's just as bad there as it was in the days when I was growing up, Jim Crow segregation. I'd rather have the Jim Crow segregation. People were much more honest about it.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, no, you can't be a caddy at my golf course because we don't let blacks on the course. Okay, then there it is. But today I'm black. I'm 18. I'm a good student. But not a great student. But I find myself on the campus at Harvard University. Is it because of the color of my skin or my character? You're still cheating me out of making it in life on my character. And so you encourage a racial politics over here. That's how I get ahead. I'm a minority. That's how I move ahead. And thus follow all manner of corruptions. Nothing good follow.
Right. Yeah, you make this point. I was going to read two passages here. One on from the content of our character, one on affirmative action, just to get your thoughts on this 30 years later. Many blacks and a considerable number of whites would say that I was sanctimoniously making affirmative action into a test of character. They would say that this small preference is the meagerest recompense for centuries of unrelieved oppression. And to these arguments, other very obvious facts must be added. In America, many marginally competent or flatly incompetent whites are hired every day. Some because their white skin suits the conscious or unconscious racial preference of their employer. The white children of alumni are often grandfathered into elite universities in what can only be seen as a residual benefit of historic white privilege. Worse, white incompetence is always an individual matter, while for blacks it is often confirmation of ugly stereotypes. The Peter Principle, I love this sentence, the Peter Principle was not conceived with only blacks in mind. Given that unfairness cuts both ways, doesn't it only balance the scales of history that my children now receive a slight preference over whites? And in a way, you're kind of reflecting President Johnson's famous speech that you quoted in both your books. Let me just grab it here real quick, where freedom is not enough. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race and say, you're free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe you have been completely fair. So how do you respond to, first, your passage characterizing that, and then President Johnson's famous line?
Well, again, I think it's the temptation that we as human beings have, particularly Americans. We're very energetic, can-do people. We have a race problem. What can we do?
Right.
And President Johnson, was, I think, living that out when he basically said, we owe blacks something now, and so we have to do, in order to regain. Let me go back a little bit. We in the 60s America confessed to centuries of colluding with racism. Woo, dark mark on this great nation. Johnson sort of saying, to get away from that mark, we've got to now socially engineer blacks up to parity with whites. That's the good thing to do. Because you can't ask somebody to, what was his famous line, to compete in a foot race, the start line, and that they're going to compete with people who had all these advantages and privileges and so forth. So we have to do it. Oh my goodness, the number of evils and tragedy that follow from that statement, we'd be here all day long articulating. But Johnson's sin that he committed in the midst of his good intentions was to take the agency, the responsibility for black uplift out of the hands of blacks and into the hands of white America and the government. And so once again, we're left there standing as the beneficiary of this, as inferiors, as helpless, as weak people who will not make it unless we somehow cast our fate, put our fate in the hands of white people, and remember that we have this moral thing over the hammer over their heads now, and so we have to learn in order to get ahead. We as blacks, the signal was, we have to learn to get ahead by manipulating the conscience of white people. Protest. We protest relentlessly and have since the 60s. That's the way we're going to get ahead. We're going to get resources that way. We're going to get everything we need that way. We're farther behind today than we were back then, when we got nothing special from whites or from the government. So it was an utter failure. It was a complete and total. It set us back so that today we as blacks have been so rewarded for being victims that we create our group identity around our victimization. We believe that our victimization is our primary power in American life. That's the hammer we have to hit white America over the head with. You know you're victimizing. You know you're a racist. You know there's mountains of evidence of that. We use that rather than develop our own talents, our own skills, where rather than competing with other groups. And so we get weaker and weaker.
Just to punctuate your point, Shelby, just to make sure people listening to this don't think you're denying that there have been severe harms, you yourself, right? In my daily life, this was 30 years ago. In my daily life, I continue to experience racial indignities and slights. This morning, I was told that blacks had too much musical feeling, soul, I suppose, to be good classical musicians. Yesterday, I passed two houses with gnomish little black lawn jockeys on the front porch. My children have been called nigger, not to mention myself. I wear a tie and carry a professional briefcase so my students on the first day of class will know I'm the teacher, and so on. I also know that actual racial discrimination persists in many areas of American life. I've been the victor in one housing discrimination suit, as were my parents before me. And certainly garden variety racism is still a tonic for the inadequate white. In my daily life, I have no immunity from any of this. What's more, I do not like it, nor will I endure it with elan. Yet, I've also come to realize that in the same society, I've been more in charge of my fate than I always wanted to believe, and that I've been limited by many things. My race was not foremost among them. So on the one hand, you're saying, yes, this is true. All those historical evils happened, and they did set back blacks back. So President Johnson's Great Society will acknowledge with good credit to him that with good intentions, yes, something should be done. I guess the question then comes, what? What should be done? And I think the point of his quote was that it's not enough to just say, okay, we're going to eliminate all the discriminatory barriers and you're free to compete to be a Google engineer or, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Go. To which, as you know, black liberals say, what do you mean just go? You say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I say I don't have boots.
Okay, then you should find some way to weave together some bootstraps.
Okay.
Yeah, because here's what minorities, blacks, really need to know and really do know when they're honest about it. White America, the government of the United States, is absolutely never, ever, under any circumstances, going to lift us up out of the backwardness, out of the underdevelopment that was imposed on us for 4 centuries. It's never going to happen. Should it happen? We can have that argument to the end of time. It is not going to happen. The only way we're ever going to achieve parity with other groups in American life is by putting the focus on individual development. Ask each other as blacks to develop ourselves to the maximum of our ability, to join America, not fight America, join it, become a part of it, compete in America. That's the kind of thing that when many millions of blacks begin to do that, you will look up one day and then we will be at parity with all other groups. I always use the example, people don't like it, but of professional sports, of basketball, of football, baseball. I grew up when I was a little kid, blacks were banned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you let somebody in, it's a totally meritorious system. Today, over 80% of the NBA is black. We need affirmative action for whites.
Yeah.
Whites are not going to ask for it. Wherever you get affirmative action, is followed by weakness, because all the incentives are in the wrong place. I'm in the workplace and I'm not doing well. Then they want to fire me. Well, I'm going to play the race card and say the environment here is insensitive to people of color. Well, all the time I'm doing that, I'm not developing. I'm not contributing to the enterprise. I'm failing, and that catches up with me. Ultimately, America is a dynamic, wealthy society. They can survive. America can survive no matter whatever the fate of Black Americans may be. We have to become a part of America, and stop sort of envisioning ourselves as people who are outsiders, who have to forever negotiate with a larger force that hates us. It doesn't hate us anymore. Doesn't hate us. Certainly, there's racism in the world, but not enough to stop you. Don't tell me that. I know better than that. I live in America all my life. I remember when it did stop you. When in the 50s, people did not put their race on their college applications because they knew they'd be turned down. Today, if you put your race on a college application, you're black, you're guaranteed success. So we have to be the ones who. Black power now has to be Black responsibility, Black self-help. It cannot be our power to scare white people. It cannot be our militancy. White people are not the issue anymore. We're the issue. We've fallen too much in love with our victimization. And we say any Black who says he's not a victim is an Uncle Tom. Well, isn't that a sad thing that the Black who screams his victimization the most is the real true Black? And those who say it's important for me to develop as a human being, as an American, are Uncle Toms. That's a tragic formula, and we're paying for it. We continue to fail profoundly. 75% of Black kids are born out of wedlock without fathers. The Black family really doesn't exist much anymore. Black women get married at half the rate of white women. They get divorced at twice the rate. So you have single parent homes. The family structure, which any group relies on more than anything else, just continues to decline because we keep, I think, giving away our responsibility to the larger society. Help us, fix us, give us resources, give. When there's never a statement to each other, do, become something, focus your life, work hard, develop. These are things you can't say in America to Black people. You'll be called a racist.
Yeah, it's the blaming the
Be a
victim.
racist.
Yeah, in your new book, Shame. By the way, that came out a couple years ago, before the BLM movement took off, if I recall. It somehow missed my radar, and I saw an ad for it. And was it the New York Times book review that I saw an ad for that book?
Yes.
Yeah, which I thought, wow, Shelby Steele's publisher is advertising him in the New York Times of all places. Whoa, okay, I got to get this book.
Good.
So you make a point, distinction between literal truth and poetic truth in the book Shame, and the stuff we've been talking about literal discrimination and racism and so on that was pretty predominant, say, before the 1960s, has since gotten way better. And there's lots of measures. I have a whole chapter on that in The Moral Arc. Steve Pinker tracks it in The Better Angels of Our Nature, how by many measures, the attitudes that whites have toward blacks have moved in the right direction. For example, polls that used to ask, if a Black family moved into your neighborhood, would you leave? I mean, I don't think they would even ask that anymore. I mean, it's almost an unthinkable question. And yet that used to be asked. And, the majority of whites said, yeah, I would move out. This is the 1950s. Or, how would you feel if your if your daughter married a black man or vice versa. And, people, their attitudes were pretty horrific pre 1970. By the 80s and 90s, it had shifted quite a bit. And, as just to remind our listeners, as late as 1967, interracial marriage was illegal in a lot of states. It wasn't until the Loving case, the Supreme Court case in 1967. I mean, it's not that long ago. And yet no one would even ask today on a poll, how do you feel about interracial marriage? It'd be like, what? Who cares, right? So, and even the, kind of Google searches that people have made since the, say, early 2000s of N-word jokes and things like that, they have declined. So by all the measures, those are what you would call literal truths. The poetic truth is that you're claiming in shame that liberals are hanging on to this old literal truth for what purpose? You said power, but what does that mean?
Well, it is power. I think that we produced out of the 60s a left in America, a political left in America, a liberalism, let's say, post-60s liberalism, that is grounded, that is its deepest source of energy and focus is in the idea of Black victimization. This is the great original sin of America. You oppressed these people for 4 centuries. It's an evil beyond comprehension. We are going to redeem Western civilization from that shame. That's basically what the social morality that liberalism produced coming out of the 60s. We're going to redeem. We're redemptive. It's a redemptive liberalism. We're going to really help America finally achieve the innocence of that evil of racism that it always claimed to have but never did. Now we're going to make that innocence real. We're going to demonstrate our innocence. We're going to prove it. If you want affirmative action or not, I don't care. You're going to get it because I need it. I need it to prove my innocence of racism. I need it here in my university to prove that we are not grounded in that old evil, that we are evolved beyond it. Well, again, the tragedy is that Blacks are the ones who are exploited in that formula. They become a means to Americans' innocence, a means to white innocence, even as they become more and more invested in their own inferiority as their argument. Our inferiority is the result of oppression, and so you're responsible for it, and so you owe me. And so we get weaker and weaker, and whites get more and more morally confident. I don't have interracial marriage, as you said. Who cares? Big deal. I'm not a racist. We're over here, on the other hand, with shattered Black family, with worse off by most socioeconomic measures than we were in the 1950s and 60s before any of this happened. And so again, it is this liberalism that we have become so invested in is now the new oppression.
I think that's the point of your opening story in Shame, where you talk about giving a talk at the Aspen Institute, which is traditionally pretty liberal. So you're sort of the token conservative there, and you give the speech similar to what you just said, and this college-age, blonde-haired white kid wants to explain to you what racism really means in America in a way that he kind of needed to hang on to that. We're racist to the bone, therefore we have to atone to you and so forth. And you're telling him, I don't need your guilt. And he didn't want to hear that. That was just so incredible. What an outrageous story.
Yeah. It was an incredible moment to see that and to see the passion. And he needed affirmative action. He needed it much more than I did. And he was going to have it, damn it. You're not going to take it away. And it is my innocence. And so much of, again, and I've tried to explore this in different places, but much of the sort of mission of whites since the 60s, when there was what I call this great confession, where America finally confessed to its racism, generated a preoccupation in white America with innocence. And innocence now is the goal. Innocence is not the improvement of the development of people who were once victimized by racism, but the innocence of the races that were associated with it. Most of liberalism today is the pursuit of white innocence, and blacks again are a means to that. They are, they're tokens. They're not human beings. You look at public housing that was again basically designed to deal with where they said blacks, we can give you an apartment, but you can't have a man. Your husband has to get out. The father has to get out. You put in place these ideas that collapsed it, just ruined the black family. We've been so ruined. We've been more spiritually ruined by liberalism than we were by racism. Racism, you were at least left in your own. You were left in charge of your own fate. You had to work around it. It was evil. It wasn't fair. But you were in charge. Liberalism wants your soul. We own you. You won't get anywhere without us. You're not capable. You're what. And so we are treated as inferiors. And then the real tragedy is that we come to believe we are inferior. We absorb that this is the only thing that makes us appealing in American life is our inferiority, our weakness. That's what whites want. That's what liberals want. When we are not that way anymore, they don't know what to do. They don't know who they are. They lose track of who they are. So it's a tangled symbiosis between black and whites that I think is helps no one. It's the racial burden we face today in America is this I call it a tangled symbiosis where each lives off the other.
Yeah, you tell the story of that white guy. I think it was at a conference where he told a racial joke at the expense of blacks, and then looked to you to laugh, as if that was you hoping you would acknowledge his innocence, that he is so non-racist he could tell a racist joke and it's okay. And basically you said, dude, this is not okay. And you're not going to get acknowledgement from me for that.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That I remember that incident. But yeah, it is me by developing this prejudice toward black people. As the liberals develop a prejudice toward them, which is their weak and in need. And by developing that, they are good people. They're on the side of the angels. And so I have to be, in order for them to be on the side of the angels, I have to be an inferior of some kind.
Of course, if you ask, if you say that or explain that to a liberal or ask them, is that what's going on in your mind? I doubt that they're going to go, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, in their minds, they're probably thinking, well, we did something wrong over the centuries and we need to make it right. And I don't know what else to do. So, affirmative action, I'm going to vote for the black president. I'm going to do this. I'm going to vote for that policy or whatever, because it makes them feel like I'm doing something to correct for this wrong that I was somehow, at least indirectly, part of.
That's right. That's exactly it. It is. In other words, their liberalism, in that sense, is an afterthought. It's not serious. It is simply the kind of stories we all tell ourselves as we go through life, and they in effect um, again use blacks in
Hmm.
that way, where we become a part of a narrative of them being superior to whites in the past who were just openly racist. They are not. They are going to make sure they prove that they're not. And in so doing, they again exploit blacks all over again. And then there we are.
I think you see a lot of this in the idea
uh, and blacks
of
facilitate this.
oh, right.
Blacks encourage.
I was going to say sometimes you see this in virtue signaling on social media where you see one of these horrific police shootings or whatever, or you read the report about black incomes or black wealth being a half or a third or a tenth or whatever of whites, whatever the measure is, and people reading that thinking, well, this is just wrong. I need to say something. I need to do something. So you go on social media and do something, or you go down to the courthouse where the protest is because you feel like you want to do something. So kind of being charitable to liberals that are doing this. They have good intentions. So the question is, will
Mhm.
that actually do anything? And two, what is the problem that needs to be solved? Now, here in I'm going to talk about your film for a minute. What Killed Michael Brown? In the film, you and your son Eli, ran some tape of people explaining what happened. Michael Brown is just innocently walking down the street, and a cop pulls up, put up your hands. He puts his hands up, and they just gun him down in cold blood. Now, if that's what actually happened, then yes, people should be totally outraged by that and using words like he was assassinated, like a Nazi Einsatzgruppen lining up Jews at the pit and shooting them. I mean, that's kind of how it's described, but that's not at all what happened. So in a way, I sometimes wonder if moral issues aren't just factual errors. Like, yes, if that's what happened, you'd be justified in being outraged. But that's not what happened. Here's what actually happened, and you guys reconstruct that, and there's nothing to be outraged about in the original sense.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. All those incidents where um, that explode in the news, like Michael Brown and Ferguson and so forth. It's always the same. What's the alignment here of power? Right away, instantly, blacks say, and one of the men we interviewed in the film, minister, big church in Ferguson, talks about the fact that when he got news of Michael Brown being shot, it was not a big deal because blacks are shot there every
Hmm.
day, uh, by the hundreds, by the thousands. I mean, it's the numbers are overwhelming when you look across the country of blacks on black crime. Then they heard that Michael Brown was shot by a white policeman. Oh, then an bomb goes
Right,
off, because everybody instantly smells power.
right,
And liberalism says this is what we're waiting for. There's almost an exhilaration. Here's white racism naked. They assassinated this poor black teenager. This duplicates American history. It's here it is in a nutshell. It's a perfect example of why our politics make sense and conservatives politics don't. Conservatives are not apoplectic like we are. We go and we riot and we show just how ferociously angry we are at this injustice and so forth. Um, to me, I think it's all mimicry. It's not real. And we march through the murder in the film. We look at
yeah.
the actual details, the way it unfolded. It had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with racism. It was a bad, tragic coming together of forces. Uh, uh, I won't give the whole film
Yeah,
away,
yeah,
but we try to we try to see what was really at
yeah.
work here, what was
Yeah,
really
your line in the movie is every black is George Floyd, every cop is Derek Chauvin. Since the George Floyd thing
right.
happened, as you were pretty much done with your film, do you want to comment on that particular case compared to the Michael Brown case? Are they different? And how do you think that might turn out? The cop in the Michael Brown case was, well, acquitted. He wasn't even tried. He's just, there was no reason to convict him, try him at all. Do you think that'll happen with Derek Chauvin? Is it possible he could get off?
It's possible. I think it's possible. You have to prove something very difficult. You have to prove that his motivation for putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd, you have to prove that the motivation was racial, it had to do with racial
Yeah,
animus. He hated black people, and this was an opportunity for him to kill one. Maybe make it look like he wasn't, but it was out and out race motivated murder. What evidence is there to support? Maybe he just, maybe it could have been any number of other things. We later found out that George Floyd and this policeman had a relationship. They knew each other. They worked together in the same place. They were
yeah,
competitors. Um, it's going to be difficult to establish in a court of law racism as a motivation. Now, negligence, irresponsibility, any number of lesser crimes. But the point is that liberalism is invested. They don't care what you say. The poetic truth, which is the partisan truth, the truth that argues my liberalism for me. The poetic truth is that here, just all over again, we keep seeing, and they're creating this national mythology that the police are out basically to kill white, uh, kill black people, and so it is there. There will what is the George Floyd and Michael Brown. What they have in common is that they represent, they both symbolize the historic victimization of blacks at the hands of evil whites, of evil race. And if we can verify that,
yeah.
uh,
Here's how you,
my point in the film was it doesn't really matter much because the poetic truth still prevails among liberals, still prevails among many of the people we talk to in Ferguson. You still can't easily say in Ferguson that Michael Brown was not killed because of racism.
hmm,
That's an idea that people
yeah,
are in Ferguson, uh, Black America, are not comfortable with, because it makes us as blacks look like
right.
frauds. It looks, our complaint is made up. It's a poetic truth.
Here's how you put it in the film. I wrote this down. White guilt's corruption is that it is always self-referential. It needs blacks to be blacks rather than human beings. And it leaves us with a liberalism that is actually an ideology of white innocence. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. You know, I was thinking about the that Washington. Well, first two things. One, the L.A. Times ran a short article with two arguments that Derek Chauvin's lawyer will probably make. One, that the neck hold with the knee in the neck, that was protocol for that police department. So he was doing what he was supposed to do, trained to do it. That's what you're supposed to do under those circumstances. And two, Derek Chauvin or George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," even before he was even being held down. He was just sitting on the curb because he had some medical conditions or something. I mean, I'm just saying this because we should be prepared. He's going to have a defense, and he may well get off, especially since they moved it up to second-degree murder, in which you have to show intent to kill based on race. And then the second point was the Washington Post had that database of, say, roughly 1,000 people that are shot dead by cops each year, 26% of which are black. And so the typical argument is, well, it should be 13% because that's the population of blacks in America. But to me, that implies that it's almost like a quota, like the cops are just driving around going, well, we got to get our 13% black kills this year. When in fact, the base rate should be how many actual interactions with police are there, and what did they escalate to? Because cops, most cops are good people. They're not just driving around looking to shoot people, right? I mean, I'm sure there are some that should never have a badge and a gun. They're just badass psychopaths. They don't belong doing that. But most are not like that. And so that 13% to 26% difference, that's the wrong baseline. But if you believe that, then you're going to assume that root causism, it's this deep structural racism, still buried in America somehow, and it kind of shows itself in these almost absurd stories. Like the last week, or 2 weeks ago, Princeton University issued that letter saying we are complicit in centuries of racism, and we've discriminated against blacks, and we're guilty. To which the Trump administration said, okay, tell us exactly what you did, because we were giving you federal funds, and that's illegal. And then they had to back off and go, well, no, we didn't actually do anything in particular. We mean it's structurally racism. Yeah, but what does that mean, structural racism? Tell us exactly what you did. And it'd be like your white interlocutor at the Aspen Institute. You mean you're a racist? Well, not me. It's those other people. Well, which people? Well, not those people, but the banking system or the political. They go for something deep and structural that you can't actually point to, because as we already said, there's been so much progress on race relations that would undermine the kind of literal truth argument. So they go to the poetic truth. But if you push them like, well, what exactly is the problem? Where? Is it you? Well, not me. Okay, then who? And yes, you could probably find some racist asshole to point to, but again, most people are not like that. So then the question is, what is it we're trying to do? What's the problem to be solved? So let's just ask you that. What is the problem to be? Is it income disparity, income inequality between whites and blacks? Is it wealth disparity? Is it property ownership? Is it percentage of CEOs or percentage of Google employees that are programmers that are black or whatever? What's the problem?
The problem is that we still haven't learned to live together completely as simply as human beings. We still want things like race to divide us up, and that we can use. Here's the value of race. Race is always a means to power. It was that way when they brought slaves over in 1619. It's that way today when universities admit black students who are not qualified. You're using race as a means to innocence and power. You're not use. That's it. That's the only value it will ever really have. And so you perpetuate the evil. You perpetuate the corruption, the injustice. Anytime race is used, anytime it is a corruption will follow. Because it has no inherent meaning beyond that. Maybe when I was growing up, they said blacks don't get sunburns. No, blacks get sunburns too. Stay out there long enough. We're just human beings, and that's where it seems to me that's what if we become a society where people who are of more different colors can live together and feel comfortable that they're being treated the same way as citizens rather than as racial identities, but as simply as American citizens. That's the goal. That's the and that's going to take some discipline.
Yeah. You talk a lot,
but there's no other.
Yeah, our latest issue of Skeptic. In fact, here's our latest issue of Skeptics on race. The reason is because there's been this sort of resurgence of talk about racial differences in IQ and sports and so on. And, the author of our article is saying race is the wrong word. There are population differences. When you say, well, blacks are better sprinters. Well, no, some of them are better marathoners. If you're from Kenya, you have the fast twitch, slow twitch muscle fiber differences with West Africans and so on. But what about Haitians? What about, you can't just say black. which blacks and how much white do you have in your blackness and so on. It's just crazy. But if you just think about it as population differences, but population, the word doesn't carry the same kind of political baggage that race does. I mean, race is such a loaded word now, and it's become almost meaningless.
Well, it is meaningless, and that's the problem. Is the things that we project onto this idea, this term of race. It's a reflection of our projections. There's a part of human beings, of all human beings, I think, as I have written, racism is endemic to, I think, the human character, just as stupidity is endemic to the human character. We have to watch out for stupidity. We have to watch out for that racist impulse that every human being feels at one time or other encounters someone from a different race. The impulse is to project. I feel a little anxiety. Well, I'm dealing with trying to look, who is this person in front of me? Well, if their skin color is dark, then okay, I'm dealing with, and then here come a whole series of projections to follow. We have to be aware that that's a dumb impulse within human beings that will always have to be mistrusted and handled as a dangerous, potentially destructive force.
Yeah.
And that it is within for us to say, every human being, some of the most racist people I know have been blacks. I won't go into describe it beyond that, but I've never met anyone who couldn't be racist. Because again, it's endemic. It's a part of our psychological makeup as human beings. It's as close to us as the impulse to generalize. When we start generalizing about human beings, we're in that territory. Yeah. And we're not giving people part of our Constitution, Bill of Rights, is to contain that part that's prejudice, that human prejudice, that human impulse to racism. What's so beautiful about America is we've designed principles that help us move beyond that. And again, the focus that's so wonderful in a democracy is on citizenship. Citizenship is not something that you inherit. Citizenship is something that you enjoy, you develop out of.
In that context, do you want to give us your thoughts on the 1619 Project?
It breaks my heart to see such resources go into such self-destructive. But it proves my point. Black victimization is in the eyes of those people who are behind that project, 1619 Project. For them, the true Black experience, the essence of who you are as a Black person, is in this long legacy of victimization at the hands of white racism. And that is the truth about who you are as a Black and who you are as a white, and that it's intractable. Why are they doing that? Why write such a silly thing? Because that is the power, that is the only power Blacks often feel they have in this rich, wealthy white nation, is the fact that they have this moral claim on it. Their victimization recommends them. It is their power. When they fail the SAT test, they can get into college anyway because they're Black. So that 1619 Project is an attempt to bolster victimization as power, to empower Blacks and say, now you can use this as a wedge, as a hammer on the larger society. You can beat them up because look at all this victimization. Look how far back it went, how ugly it was, so forth and so on. It breaks my heart because it's such a fool's errand. It achieves nothing. The black family sitting here, meanwhile, damn near completely shattered. You know, 75, 80% of kids born out of wedlock, and you're worried about 16, 19? Drugs, gangs. Look at the amount of murder that now infests inner city black community. Hundreds, thousands every single year. That's the amount of death dished out in the last 10, 12, 15, more than that years is just inconceivable. Yeah. Thousands young black lives just lost. And your answer to that is that if we just understand how victimized we are as black, and we get that somehow is going to deliver. We are at a point now in Black America where we've so relied on this victimization that it's made us a little crazy and self-destructive, and we're going to miss the boat. We're going to get until we get it together that victimization was a bad deal, racism is a bad deal, but it won't do anything to get us to into development, into moving into American life. We have to do that despite whatever our history was. Okay, that was a raw deal. Whites didn't have to do that. That's what that is. But we can't change that. We have to take responsibility for our own development anyway. There are other groups in history that have done that, and it has served them very well.
So, for example, Jews were discriminated against. There was a quota for Jews to get into Harvard and other major Ivy League colleges. Women couldn't even go to Harvard until, I don't know, the late 60s, I think. Asians, Chinese were discriminated against in late 19th century America. Irish, Germans in the early 20th century discriminated against. But I guess the counter argument to that is, well, skin color is a different kind of thing than, at least the Irish are white, or some Jews are white, or something like that. Or maybe they had a different cultural background. Like in the case of Jews, they had a culture rich in education and family structure and things like that. But I suppose that would be your point, because you're emphasizing the nuclear family or having a father in the home as making a difference. Walk us through that argument, like from a social science perspective. What's the causal mechanism to go from a little child in a home with two parents versus one, and then decades later they make less money, or they don't have as good of jobs, or they're shot dead in a crappy neighborhood or something like that?
Well, Jews, for example, immigrating, coming into America after World War II and at other times, finding that the public school system didn't work for them, created yeshivas, those schools where they educated their own children, and they educated them well. That's why so many of them were qualified to get into Harvard, because the group took responsibility for a liability. The group could have said, well, there's anti-Semitism around every corner. We don't have a chance here. So we'll demonstrate and protest and so forth. Many Jews did protest, and they should have. There was anti-Semitism, and it needed to be confronted. But that did not spare the group responsibility for educating its children. Go into an inner city in America today, and where do you see that same attitude? I can remember my own parents in the 1950s. I went to a segregated school, two schools in the district, one white, one black. My mother organized a boycott of all the parents in the black school, kept the kids home for a year, changed the school, got the principal fired, got in new teachers, said, because you're going to educate our children. You're going to do it. We don't have any other opportunity. They did that. It was the first desegregation lawsuit in the North. Where's that attitude in Black America today? Who's saying, no, you don't understand. It will happen. Our children will be educated, and we're not going to waste time spent and resources arguing with some imaginary white racism to say, spare us that struggle of educating our own children, of trying to restore family coherence in the Black community. When I see somebody saying that they want to bring back the Black family, I'll be at the front of that movement. That is exactly what we need, but we don't do that. And again, this old tangled symbiosis. Yeah. Whites don't. They like us. They like us to keep demonstrating, and we do it vicariously for them. And they keep us over sort of playing the drama of their guilt and innocence, rather than solving the real problem: underdevelopment, underachievement, under.
So not having a father, having a father in the home, so the mother has to work more. So there's less adult supervision around. Children are more likely to get involved in local gangs because they need some kind of structure. In other words, I'm looking for what's the causal mechanism. Maybe there's fewer books in the house, less time spent between parent and children interacting together, reading, doing homework, whatever. And so you get this kind of cascading effect down the line. Decades later, you see the effect. In other words, what I'm getting at, so it's sort of an on average difference. I was raised in a two-parent home. My wife was not. She was raised by a single mom in Cologne, Germany. But her mom sent her to a really good Catholic school where there was a lot of discipline, and her mom made sure she went to got classical ballet training where she was in school till 3 and then in ballet till 6 and then homework till 9, boom, bed. So there was that discipline. She didn't need a father. The father was just a sperm donor. He left. And so, she'll argue, well, I didn't have a father, so what? But so what we're talking about here is an on average difference from which maybe you don't have a mother that's cracking the whip on the discipline because in America, maybe the mother has to work 2 jobs and she's not around or something like that.
We ran into people, and as we were shooting this film, who I remember one girl who was 18 years old had 3 children already.
18?
Yes, it's hard to conceive. But this is the norm. She never had a father. In that sense, it has evolved into a matriarchal. The Black underclass is sort of a matriarchal society. The mothers have to do whatever mothering and so forth gets done. The men are sort of satellites around, making very little contribution and so forth. You get a human breakdown as time goes on because, what if you're the 5th generation fatherless kid? The siblings you had are by different sperm donors. None of the family structures and units and sources of meaning and love and affection are in place. Then of course you're going to do drugs. What else is there to do? Well, the American goodwill has been the facilitator of that, the enabler of Black collapse. They collapse. They just continue to up the payment, up the welfare. Their response is always to give more and never, ever. The one thing they won't ever do is ask for discipline, for self-help, for self-responsibility. The government of the United States of America will not do that. Nobody, no conservative, nobody will do that. Because you're blaming the victim. You're a racist. Well, when America gets the courage, well, race always brings us to those places in our cultural history where the only solution is courage. That somebody has to have the courage to say, all right, call me a racist, call me whatever the heck you want to call me. But if you don't take responsibility for moving from point A to point B, you are never going to get to point B. You're just going to make a world out of A. You're going to make a world out of human collapse and failure, out of disillusionment. You all of the falsehoods you have to tell yourself. You have to tell yourself that Michael Brown was a victim of racism in order to live in this this collapsed world. Well, again, white America is responsible in many ways for that by continuing to enable it to prove its own innocence, ironically. So,
By the way, since you brought up Michael Brown again, have you seen the Tony Timpa tape? Tony Timpa was the white guy in Texas that died with the cop on his neck.
No,
See?
I haven't.
No one has. I hadn't heard of it either. It's 4 years old. I hadn't heard it till my friend John McWhorter, the linguist, wrote about it. And I thought, Tony Timpa, never heard of the guy. Same thing. He's on the ground. I can't breathe. It's a white cop, a couple white cops, and a white guy. And again.
Well, that's it. He's white.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just disturbing.
There's no power in that. There's no power in that situation. It's, so it's neither here nor there. It's negligible. If it's black on black, as I always say in the movie, it's what makes things happen is when the trigger finger is white,
right,
and the victim is black. Then all of America converges and renegotiates its power relationship,
right,
and everything's up in the air for a minute.
So these arguments you're making here, I presume you would make against reparations as well?
The idea of reparations is the same thing. I'm a victim. The only thing that can save me is if I get justice. I'm here to give the bad news. We ain't going to ever get justice. Ever. The sooner we accept that, the better off we'll be. That's not the way history works. And for us to cling to that, we only do it because we got white people around us who will pay us off, who need their innocence and will pay us off for believing that this garbage.
In other words, get the checkbook out, dude.
How much?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As if I'm gonna write a check and that'll absolve me of my white guilt, and of course it wouldn't.
That's right. And then after you write that check in 6 months or so, I'm going to want a little more because this is how racist you are. You cut my reparation check in half. You're taxing. It never ends. It never ends. In the end of the day, I'm a Malcolm X fellow. I've always admired Malcolm X, who told the bitter truth back in the '60s that we're going to get what we make for ourselves, and as Americans, not just as black people. That's the beauty. We don't have to be isolated and separatist. We won't get anywhere that way. We join this mainstream. Many, 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 many blacks do. Millions of blacks do, and thrive, and do very well in America, all the way up to the presidency, CEOs, you name it. We've those who focused on developing themselves have done very well. That's the role model. That's where it's not a big impossible thing. It's rather mundane. Go to school, study hard.
You talk about that a little bit in Shame, your journey in your 20s, going to Africa, since you mentioned Malcolm X. I'd be curious to know how you when you were in your 20s, how you viewed Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. They're often contrasted, one more militant, one more gradualist and peaceful. But maybe that's a little hindsight now with some perspective. What was it like in the 60s when you were growing up with those two giants out there?
In the '60s, it's fairly complex. There were, but in the '60s, Malcolm X came along sort of as um, a point of reference to King. King was the pacifist and passive nonviolence and the Gandhian
Yeah.
sort of leader of his people. Malcolm X came along as the angry militant, the radical who spared no one and preached to blacks. You need some self-esteem. You need some
Mm.
dignity. You need to take charge of your own life. You need of your own fate. And in his early career, he was virulently racist himself. He was a separatist. He believed in a radical kind of separatism. Didn't have faith in America ever. Well, as he got a little bit older, he broadened out. He traveled to the Middle East. He expanded his thinking. He dropped that. He dropped the racial
Mm.
militancy. He dropped the racial separatism and focused really on
Mm.
self-help, which aligned him, ironically, with people like Booker T. Washington, who was the sort of self-help um, leader
Right.
of Black America. We have to do it ourselves. Drop your bucket where you are. Don't wait for somebody else to clear the world for you. Hard work is good. What is it? A little something spoiled. Little money, too much something spoiled a good plow hand. Little too much education
Mm.
spoiled a good plow.
Right.
Well, that theme has always been a part of Black life, and sometimes it goes into obsequience, and sometimes um, Booker T. Washington did, though rarely. But he was identified with that position. Malcolm was the
Mm.
militant and militant side of that. King was, and I love King for that. When I was young and I was militant, I thought I called Martin Luther King and Uncle Tom,
You did?
and yeah, I thought he's wrote a couple for my student college newspaper. Wrote a couple articles saying he was a favorite of white liberals who were not really our
Mm.
friends. Separatism was the driving force then that we'll never get anywhere with in America. We'll always have to be separate. Uh, well, the I learned and I traveled as a young man. I write about that. And I read a lot of illusions were very quickly dispelled when you travel by yourself through Africa in the late '60s, early '70s, and you see how leaders work. You see what other societies are like. You see how race was. I really, for the first time, understood that it was a construct of American life. What it didn't have much to do with other
Mm.
societies. Um, but I learned from that race was really a not it was not a good thing to organize your life
Mm.
around race, where you waste time. And I see black students today, and there's this whole identity thing, and it's okay if you went through that phase. I certainly went through it. I very open about that. Uh, but keep in mind, it's a ticket to nowhere. There's nowhere to go. You have to find that in broader America. That's where opportunity is. That's where you have an opportunity to become an individual and a fully developed human being. Where America is bigger than blackness, and it offers more and is healthier. Blackness at this point is, I call it, historical cowardice. You're afraid to move into that big
Mm.
society. You're afraid. The biggest fear is freedom itself. You're afraid of freedom. And you use your race to protect yourself from the risk taking, the hard work of living in freedom and making a life in freedom. That's what's
Yeah.
frightening. And so you say blackness is good luck to you. It's a waste of time. And I tell you, I'm happy to say this to young people every chance I get. Embrace freedom. There, what do you love to do as an individual human being? What are your passions? You find them, follow them, grow as a person. Take advantage of everything in the wealthiest, freest society in the world.
Is that how you became a conservative, Shelby? You talk about in your book your parents were social activists, and you were a young radical activist in your 20s. How'd you become a conservative?
I found that I found that this idea of race was a ticket to nowhere.
Hmm.
And it began to be very all we did was to hang around and say who was really black and who wasn't, and who was the blackest, and talk about everybody. This he's a Tom, she's a so this sort of thing, and blacks who were sort of moving on and finding success in life. We invariably, as Richard Wright said, we were crabs in a basket. We would pull them back down.
Mm.
We would embarrass them. You saw this happen recently with Daniel Cameron in Louisville, the black attorney general who I think did a marvelous job of as an attorney general, following the law rather than the racial politics and all around him. Well, he to me is a black hero.
Mm.
He's the kind of guy we ought to be looking up to today, rather than somebody who's super black and has got all the
Right.
symbology of black out.
Sometimes, Shelby, I think all social movements go through something like that, where there's a purging of who's not the purest. It's what you just described. Feminist movement has gone through that many times. My partner at Skeptic, she's about your age, so a little older than me. So she was a radical kind of activist feminist in the 60s. And then she talks about all the splintering. Who's the purest feminist? Who's the true feminist? And then I saw this when I went through my Ayn Rand phase in college with reading Atlas Shrugged and all that stuff. And then I got involved in the objectivist movement. And then after she died and those biographies came out, it turns out the whole objectivist movement went through all those purges. Who's the purest follower of Ayn Rand? And and if you went to that movie or you listen to this music, you're not a true objectivist, so you're out. And then in the 2000s, I'm an atheist, so the atheist movement kind of went through this after Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, came out. It was a huge, huge bestseller. So then it became, are you a militant atheist? You got to be a militant atheist. You got to get in people's faces and really show them how stupid they are to believe in God. It's like, well, but I don't really want to do that. Then you're not a real atheist. Like, guys, there aren't that many of us, to be kicking people out. And I've kind of been a lifelong libertarian, now maybe more of a classical liberal. Libertarian, same thing. I think it was Milton Friedman and one of the Austrian economists had kind of a falling out over some little minutia thing. You're not a true free market capitalist. You're not a true libertarian. It's like, there aren't that many of us. And so I began to think in human nature, maybe that's just a natural thing that happens to groups. Maybe they're competing for power within the group. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I all my life I've had that kind of pressure, and you're in the group or you're out of the group, and remember, this is sort of held over your head. This is the power that the group can exercise to achieve conformity and get everybody on the same. I think what people are doing in those kinds of situations are dealing with some inner fear, and where my group identity now, I'm using it to assuage that fear, that anxiety, that maybe I'm not going to make it, or life is more difficult than I thought it was, and so therefore I'm going to make sure I'm super black. Um, I'm going to be the blackest of the black, and I end up in that kind of situation, and I sort of put other people down. Um, People have held that over my head all my life. They do now, and we're now black conservatives are put in this camp, and we're betraying the group, the race, so forth and so on. Yep, you got me right. I don't put race anymore as number one in my life. I'm an American citizen. I don't like to join any group that has the word black in it. That includes black conservative. Black conservative. What the heck is that? You're either conservative or you're not. What is the special syncopation of black and conservative? All it says is that, well, you most blacks are not. That's unfortunate. But again, it seems what is fascinating to me is what kind of individual you are, and what kind of contribution are you making to a better world. I hope to dispel some of the power of blackness over black people. Let's face our freedom now. Face our freedom. That's what I see as bravery. And this case I just mentioned a minute ago, Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, the general. Well, this is a man who's struggling, who's facing up to freedom. What a heroic man. He's got a job to do. His law is the law. Blackness can't intervene in the between, and we need more of that. He enrages blacks because he says he's in effect saying the law is more important to me than the race.
Right.
If you're somebody who's healing all your wounds by race, you're not going to like me because then I'm the attorney general. The law is my mission. He ought to be the role model.
Well, since I have a conservative here and you're not a black conservative, you're just a conservative. Let me ask you, I want to present sort of Steele man, the
State, man.
Yeah. I don't care how much melanin you have in your skin. You're a conservative. That's what I want to know. I'm not a conservative, though, for various reasons I'll get to in a minute. But let me Steele man the liberal argument, or maybe the progressive argument. Just an article a couple days ago in The Hill, Ken Levy, who I think self-identifies as a progressive. It doesn't matter that it's him. It's just he's articulating that kind of progressive position on this particular issue. So I'll just read you what he wrote. Suppose that Anne, a single 30-year-old black mother of 2 children, works 2 jobs, both of which pay federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, and contracts pneumonia. What role, if any, should the government play here? The progressive will say 3 things. First, the government should force Anne's employers to pay her much higher wages so that she can afford all the necessities and a reasonable amount of luxuries that modern Americans typically enjoy. Second, neither Anne's race nor her relatively low income should make her less of a priority than any other American. Her value, not just as an employee and as a mother, but also as a human being, is equal to that of every other human being. Third, the government should therefore help Anne receive and pay for the medical treatment she needs to recover. Whether the law should grant her this right is largely a question of political theory. Conservatives and libertarians answer this question in the negative. They ultimately prefer that the government act as a bad Samaritan toward the less rich and less politically powerful, that it just stand by and let them fend for themselves. This callous position is fundamentally inegalitarian. It presupposes that the rich and politically powerful are more valuable, more worthy of the rights to life, liberty, and property than everybody else. By contrast, progressives are committed to the egalitarian ideal first articulated in the Declaration of Independence and echoed by the 14th Amendment, the principle that every human being, whatever his or her race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender, sexual orientation, wealth, social status, and intelligence, has equal intrinsic worth. It's difficult to see how Americans in 2020 would disagree with this more enlightened view, but millions do, including many Republican voters. So let's let that stand in as kind of that typical liberal progressive position about a problem like that. And how does a conservative like you respond to that particular kind of argument?
To the last one, you mean I'm not sure I got. Could you go over the last one of the three?
Government, it's the government's job to help her. She should be paid more. She should have the basics of property and 3 square meals a day and health care, and that's the government's job. It's we can't expect, say, charity to do it. He doesn't say that, but but he's saying that if you don't agree with that, then you're not agreeing with what the Constitution and Declaration of Independence is really all about. That is, all people are created equal.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I what my own sense is that I suppose theoretically, on a theoretical level, there are instances where the government could facilitate help someone in that situation with all kinds of conditions on it. But that is as far as I would go, if at all, because the other side of that, what seems to be the progressive position, seems to be wanting to help, and so the other side of that is that you are, when you give somebody something because they're in trouble, the downside is that you're taking agency for their life, for their happiness. Government is taking that agency. They don't do that for free. The government wants all kinds of things, loyalties, political affiliations, all sorts of things that they want in return for whatever it is they give. So, unless, if we're talking life and death, this is a mother who's if she doesn't get help of some kind, is going to lose, her children are going to die, and then obviously you want to save a life. But that's it, because instant return. Then she begins to say, well, I've gotten 6 weeks of sick leave, but I would sure love 12. 12 then is justice in my case. Somebody else, well, 16 is justice in my case. And I'm going to join the political party that gives me 16. And I'm going to, and so now look at all of the agency over my own life I'm giving away to the government. How I'm making myself dependent. This is what happened to Black America. We got, they didn't defeat us with slavery and segregation. They defeated us with welfare. Because they stole our mind, they stole our soul, our heart, our dignity. They took our dignity away. And every time we get mad and want to talk about white supremacy and all that sort of, where's your dignity? You only get dignity from one source, and that is when you take responsibility yourself. And you insist on that. You help people do that. You encourage them to do that. You do that in a loving way. You make that a part of honor in your group. You honor those people who struggle with freedom. You honor each other. You support each other as they struggle to become themselves. That's the enterprise you join. You don't join a movement that's going to pay you 16 weeks instead of 12. What's that? That's a life of a compromised life of humiliation.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the sort of distinction. Now, when I was a young man and so forth, I would certainly entertain the other The government should give me this, should give me child care, should give me so forth and so on.
Yeah.
I'm not young anymore. And,
I was thinking about the reparations question recently when I was reading some Native American history. And, I was thinking, boy, if reparations passes for blacks, Native Americans, they had it just as bad. I mean, they could certainly argue. Not only were they killed, but their land was stolen. It's like that bit about where, Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon. It wasn't Napoleon's to sell, and it wasn't Jefferson's to buy. The land belonged to other people. So we just took it. And right. Then, to your point, then put them on reservations and put them on welfare. Well, that was the end of that.
That defeated them. They were a great people, but you look at the performance of blacks on reservations as Native Americans on reservations compared to Native Americans who've left the reservations and joined the larger society. There's just no comparison. So again, we, out of guilt, one of my favorite themes, we have enabled this weakness in Native Americans and in blacks. And now the weakness that white guilt engendered and enabled, that weakness is our racial problem.
Right.
It just simply keeps it going because we're not honest. We don't say what people in good, healthy families say to children when they're raising them. You have to develop yourself into something. You have to grow into more and more responsibility, not less and less. We don't do that, and
so that would be your recommendation.
So
that's why you're a conservative, I guess. Those particular values. Those values.
If those are conservatives, then I'm a conservative. I like to think of them as human. Mm-hmm. That is to say, they are in operation always for everybody. They're never different, and anybody who follows them anywhere in the world in any situation will do better than they will if they give their response. We keep one of the great illusions in the human experience is that you can give away agency over your fate and somehow benefit from it. And we're all pressed and scared to death and overburdened. But if the minute we try to give up some of that burden, we become weaker and fail. And that's what we've done now since the 60s, 60 years now, we've done that to black Americans. And they've gotten weaker. When I was a kid growing up in an all black, poor, segregated neighborhood, every kid in the neighborhood had a father, except there was one family, father died. The rest of the community took care of them. Everybody had a father. There was a family. There was no such thing as a black underclass. It didn't exist. We were all poor, but we were not an underclass. We were families, and the kids in my little immediate neighborhood. One of them invented independent film in America. Another became a PhD professor at the University of Michigan in biology. Another became the leader of the FBI in the Western United States. And I could go on and on. This is poor black kids from a poor black neighborhood. All of them had mothers and fathers, and the community had a sense of unity. You could be, as I talk about in the film, you could be chastised by somebody who wasn't your parent, but who would say, "You, Shelby, you stop that." I'm and you had a sense that there was a community you had to live up to. They were proud of you when you did well, and they were not when you didn't do well. That's what we all did much. Look at there was no welfare. There was no nothing.
When my wife moved here from Germany 6 years ago to be with me, which I still think she made a big mistake, but let's not let her know about that. one of her observations was how much race is talked about on the news. Just channel surfing different shows, talk shows, news shows, whatever. It's just like black, white, black, white, black, white. It's like, you guys are obsessed with this stuff, even more than Nazis. That was her other observation. What's with the Nazis in America? That's all, every other show is about the Nazis. We got over Hitler decades ago. How can we get past the black-white thing? That's all we talk about is race. And it doesn't seem to help to just say, well, stop talking about it, because we just keep talking about it.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest problems is that there's such a risk involved in being honest about racism. White Americans are absolutely terrorized of being called a racist. And minorities will know that, and that is their power. And so right there, conversation is over with. Whites they feel they would be foolish to tell you what they honestly think. And so they don't. And we don't have an honest dialogue. We'll talk about all kinds of things like funding for policemen or something, as though that has some real meaningful relationship to the place of blacks in American life. That's how ridiculous and absurd how pitiful our racial discussion is. How about a discussion addressing the subject of what the descendants of oppression really live with and face, and why freedom is such a challenge to people who were formed in a culture that came out of 4 centuries of oppression. We might come up with some very different answers than what we come up with today. You might see the benefit that the only route, the only chance out of this is individual responsibility. Ralph Ellison, my great hero, the challenge is not to create the conscience of your race. The challenge is to create the features of your face.
Wow.
I love that. That's it. I just love that.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It's so true.
Yeah. Shelby, that's a great place to end the conversation. You're one of the most eloquent spokespersons for individual autonomy and freedom and liberty. Again, your new film will release this podcast the week the film comes out, which is October 16th, produced with your son, Eli Steele, What Killed Michael Brown. And then your latest book it's called Shame. And, of course, available at all online retailers, since we're still in semi-lockdown here. So I want to be mindful of your time. I know you're busy there at the Hoover Institution doing a lot of work. So anyway, I really appreciate your coming on here, but especially your work, which is really important. Keep it up.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed myself, maybe too much.